My first thought was that one of my fellow officers had shot Oswald. But as the crowd began hollering, the gun passed in front of my face, and I grabbed at it, but I missed it, and I kept hollering, "Somebody get that gun, somebody get that gun." And there was a voice that came from this pile of humanity that said they had the gun, and suddenly I ended up with Ruby. We drug him back into the jail office where we restrained him and began to get handcuffs on him. Chief Curry, along with Captain Fritz and other top administrators, had originally planned, it was my understanding, to transfer Oswald during the night, but outside political pressures coming from as far as Washington insisted that Oswald be shown that he hadn't been coerced into a confession, that he hadn't been beaten, and that the world exposure be granted on this subject. After all, he was an assassin accused and killing President of the United States.
Chief Curry did not have the final say as to when or how Oswald was transferred. It came from his superior, which was the city manager at that time. So, again, we knew better than to transfer him under those conditions, but we didn't have any choice.
I was fairly certain in my mind when I saw Lee Oswald lying on the floor that he was going to die. And then I went to Parkland Hospital, and certainly he was dead. And that's when I met his wife, Marina, and his mother, Marguerite. Marina, through an interpreter from SMU, a Russian interpreter, she asked him that could she see the body. And the doctor told me, said that she shouldn't see the body. They just done an autopsy on him, and he wasn't even cleaned up yet. But she insisted on seeing him, and his mother Marguerite was there, and she insisted on seeing him. So I took them in to view the body, and there was a tear in the right eye of Lee Oswald, and Marina asked through the interpreter, was he crying when he died? And the doctor told her that no, some people die with their eyes open, some die with them closed, but this tear, he was not crying when he died.
Paul O'Connor was a medical orderly who assisted at President Kennedy's autopsy on the night of the assassination. For many years he was prevented, under threat of court-martial, from talking about his frightening experience.
It was such a relief when the House Assassination Committee allowed me to talk. Then I could get it off my chest. It was such a relief to do that. And I'm glad it was brought out of the closet. At least I don't have to walk around the rest of my life bursting at the seams waiting to say, you people don't realize what I did or what I saw. You just believe what you heard or told to believe. You know he was shot, you know he was dead, and you know he was buried. That's all the general public knew. They didn't know about what we knew. And that was a hell of a feeling to carry around with you.
In speaking out about what he saw at the Washington autopsy, Paul O'Connor has exposed major discrepancies in the official account of the events of that night, and in particular, the president's wounds. In Dallas, minutes after the assassination, the doctors at Parkland Hospital, in addition to noting a large wound in the back of Kennedy's head, had also observed a small wound in his throat, as Dr. Robert McClelland explains.
Dr. Perry told me as I was helping him do the tracheostomy that he had made the incision, which goes this direction across the neck, for placement of the tube in the windpipe, through the little wound that had been in the front part of the neck, apparently about here, and as I understand, nicked the tie a little bit in coming through. And I estimate from what he told me that the size of that tiny little injury on the front part of the neck was perhaps the size of the end of my little finger. very small. What I would usually think about that kind of wound, and what I thought about that one from his description of it, was that it was most likely an entrance wound.
Saw a picture of the throat wound. Nice little neat wound about like this, is what they showed in the picture. When it actually was a great big nasty blown out wound. Just a big mess. Why they would say this is what it looked like when it didn't is just beyond me. The rendition is just totally fabricated.
But the official autopsy photographs are not the only dubious aspect of that night's activities.
When somebody is shot and killed, they usually do what they call a legal post-mortem. And that involves plotting a trajectory of a missile, where it comes in and goes out, and what angle it was. And we didn't do any of that at all. They weren't really interested, it seems, on how it happened, where it happened from. Nobody had mentioned whether he had got shot in the front or the back or the side or what. I remember that Dr. Humes was just about ready to pull his hair out because he was a very meticulous person. And he'd start to do something, and Admiral Berkeley would say, "Don't do that," and he'd just tense all up, and we'd have to go to some other procedure. And I thought to myself, this is a very unbelievable, strange night. I felt like I was in some kind of a horror story that was real. But what really scared me was about several days later, after the autopsy, we were ordered into the commanding officer's office, all of us that had anything to do with the autopsy, where we signed orders that stated under penalty of general court-martial, you will not divulge any information or talk to anybody. That's what scared me.
Dr. Cyril Wecht, a distinguished forensic pathologist and a fearless critic of the cover-up, believes the truth can still be established.
I think it would still be possible, even today, to determine how, in fact, John Kennedy was killed, to be able to prove that there were two people firing. I would like to see a real murder investigation conducted. I would like to see FBI agents and other law enforcement people going to individuals who are involved in the chain of custody, find out where the brain is, find out where the codochromes of the interior chest wounds are, find out where the microscopic tissue slides are. I would like to see all of the evidence brought together and a thorough scientific analysis undertaken. I would also like to see repeat experiments done shooting a Mannlicher Carcano with 6.5 millimeter military-type ammunition through goat carcasses and human cadavers to simulate the bony fractures in Governor John Connally, and let's see what those bullets look like. Those things can be done. If they are done, then I am convinced that the Warren Commission report will crumble like a house of cards. And of course, the people on the other side, they're not stupid. They are also convinced that that is what would happen, and that is exactly why such a new investigation is not being undertaken.
But the questioning voice of the American people refuses to be silenced. Each year on the anniversary of the assassination, a dedicated band of disbelievers meet on the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza, typical of those millions of Americans who've refused to swallow their government's official lies. Through their diverse efforts and their persistence, critics such as these have kept the quest for the truth alive.
As with most people, I believed the Warren report at first. I think we all had to. We needed to know that there was no nameless they that got away with this, that it had been solved. But the more that was written, the more that we learned, the more questions there were. For every question that was answered, there were 10 more new ones that needed to be answered. And I felt that for my own sake, for all of our peace of mind, we needed to know more of what happened to President Kennedy. They didn't tell us the truth.
It's a very valid criticism of the Warren Commission that it failed to follow up many, many important leads and witnesses that came to its attention. One of the best examples, I think, is the fake Secret Service man up on the grassy knoll and a Dallas police officer. Within a minute or two after the shooting, Officer Joe Marshall Smith ran up on the grassy knoll following the other witnesses. That's where they all went initially. And Joe Smith pulled his pistol when he spotted a man behind the picket fence up on the grassy knoll. And this was a man dressed in coat and tie. And this man, even looking right into Smith's revolver, said, "Hey, I'm Secret Service." And he pulled out some credentials that to Officer Smith indicated that this man was legitimate. Smith left him alone and went away, investigating other areas in the plaza. The important part is that the Secret Service at no time had any agents anywhere in Dealey Plaza, with the exception of the agents who were riding in the motorcade. So here's a guy passing himself off as a Secret Service agent to a Dallas police officer, and there was no Secret Service agent there. The Warren Commission either didn't know that or didn't want to know. They didn't even ask Officer Smith pertinent questions about that encounter. And to me, that's one of the great failings of the Warren Commission, and a typical example how important evidence was overlooked initially or lost at that time. There was some new evidence that came out in late 1976, evidence that I was responsible for, in that the researchers had long been aware of recordings of the Dallas Police Department's radio channels. The department was using 2 at that time. And some interference began just a couple minutes before the assassination occurred, and that interference continued for 5 minutes or so after the assassination, and it effectively blocked all police communications on their main channel. What wasn't known was which officer was responsible for it. My thinking was that if the officer were in or very close to Dealey Plaza, his open microphone may have picked up the sound of the shots. From that theory sprang an investigation by the House Assassinations Committee, and after some digging they found what they thought were the original recordings. They had the scientists analyze the recordings and decided that after some tests and then firing some test shots in Dealey Plaza and recording those, that there were 4 shots fired during the assassination, perhaps as many as 6. And that, of course, proved conspiracy.
For 2 years, through political turmoil, the House committee flourished. It investigated areas that needed to be investigated, some that we hadn't thought of before. Others, unfortunately, were overlooked. And as a result, after the dust cleared, we were given a report. The report said, yes, there was a conspiracy, but a very limited conspiracy. There were at least 2 people firing at President Kennedy. Much of the evidence leading toward involvement of government investigative agencies, perhaps in the actual murder, perhaps just in the cover-up, were all pretty much glossed over. Some recommendations were made to the Justice Department. They were never followed through. During the House Assassinations Committee hearings, the FBI and CIA admitted that they had withheld evidence, that they had obstructed justice. Not a single person was ever put to task for this. They were just allowed to go, and that's the way it remains till this day. We can't know the truth unless we have subpoena power and people that want to know the truth. If they don't want to know the truth, whether because they don't believe in it or because they feel it's politically advantageous to themselves not to investigate it, then we'll never know the truth. But how can this country go on after a quarter of a century of this cover-up? How can we build on that? We're building on a lie. We've got to know the truth.
The House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded, primarily on the acoustics evidence, but not exclusively, that there were 2 people firing shots in Dealey Plaza. And they decided, based on the scientific evidence that took a period of some 9 to 10 months to analyze fully, that shots number 1, number 2, and number 4 all came from the Texas School Book Depository building. But shot number 3 did come from the grassy knoll to the president's right front. Therefore, it's inescapable. Conspiracy because there were at least 2 shooters. So all this means that according to the United States government, there are now 2 official conclusions as to what happened. The Warren Commission says there was 1 shooter and 3 shots. The House Assassinations Committee says 2 shooters, a total of 4 shots. There's a conspiracy or there isn't. That's where we're stuck, and we have been since 1978.